Okay, while people are logging on, I would love to introduce our wonderful guest today. We have Catherine Van Tassel from GBS. She is the GBS director in the Behavioral Health Consulting, and we are so lucky to have her. She's presented to us twice this month for Mental Health Month, so we are very appreciative of the wealth of knowledge you have shared with us. And I want to tell you a little bit more about her and her amazing background if you don't know already. So, Catherine holds a dual master's degree in both social work and physician assistant studies from the University of Utah. She is a licensed clinical social worker and a board certified physician assistant specializing in mental health and lifestyle medicine. She has an extensive experience in diverse clinical environments, including both inpatient and outpatient settings, that has helped her develop a well-rounded clinical expertise. She's also a certified personal trainer, and she holds a nutrition level 1 coach certification. So she is extremely well-rounded. And Catherine, she co-teaches the psychiatry course for physician assistant students at the University of Utah and practices medicine at Mora Medical, focusing on disease prevention and reversal through lifestyle medicine. And then, like I mentioned before, she serves on she serves as the behavioral health director for GBS, where she consults with clients like us at Salt Lake County on their employees' mental health needs and provides mental health trainings like mental health first aid, advises on policy changes, and even implements effective mental health solutions. So we are so excited to have you here again, Catherine. I will turn the time over to you to talk about creating a compassionate workplace when we are navigating around addiction.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited. This is our third and last for the month, but hopefully not last for the year. And thank you for all of those that are joining. Happy Mental Health Awareness Month, and creating time to attend this webinar. So we'll dive right in. This is a really interesting space to be in right now because sadly we have seen substance use increase. We saw it increase throughout the pandemic, and then we've seen it continue and not come down. The other part of this is we're seeing different demographics be more impacted than others than we've ever seen. So for an example, women have been seeing their alcohol use at rates that we have never seen historically, and actually an increase in overall mortality. So just an important time to talk about mental health, talk about substance use, destigmatize it, and make sure that people are getting the help that they need. So we'll get started here. Okay, so just what are our objectives and what will we be talking about today? So this is just to increase awareness, understanding, and be given practical tools. And essentially, this is to inspire you, your workplace, to have a compassionate workplace culture in terms of mental health and substance use. Okay, so I just want to share a little bit of a story that really, I think, an example of one, we just never know who's going to be impacted by substances. And two, when somebody is connected to appropriate resources, how life-changing that can be. So this picture is a woman called Amy Dashel, and she's here in Salt Lake City, Utah. I've had the privilege of meeting her and is a lovely, lovely human. This picture was actually the front page of the Salt Lake Tribune when Operation Rio Grande happened. So for those of you that aren't familiar with that, this was a few years ago. Operation Rio Grande was essentially something that the mayor had put out to, there were unsheltered people living down by the Rio Grande, and they went down there and some people were arrested and everybody was given opportunity get recovery treatment. And like most plans, not all plans are perfect, and this definitely had a lot of holes in the plan. However, Amy was one of those people that was offered treatment, and she decided to take treatment instead of going to jail. And as you can see here, her life is completely different from having the opportunity to be able to go in and get residential treatment. Now, Amy's story is not unlike so many that we have heard. So Amy has a few children. She was married. She was working in a law office. Her life looked pretty much like everyone else's life. Could have been a colleague, could have been a friend, a sister. And she had routine surgery, was given opioids. And as we know, with a lot of people, can go in a very negative direction. And sadly for Amy, it did. She ended up unsheltered on the streets and was using IV drugs and living a life that clearly she didn't even recognize herself, lost her children, clearly lost her job, and then was given the opportunity to get help. And now she works with Up on the Hill on passing bills to support people in recovery. She went back to school and is getting a master's degree in social work. In fact, I think she just finished that, and clearly is a huge advocate in the community for recovery, works with USARA. And this is such an amazing example of what happens when people, again, have this opportunity to get treatment and have support. So what are we just seeing nationally in terms of substance use? So about 47.8 million people have had a substance use disorder in the past year. And when we look at it in the workplace, we know that 70% of individuals with substance use continue to maintain employment. So that means about 10% of a group will be impacted by substance use disorder. Sadly, though, only about 1 in 11 people are getting help or have access to treatment. So the need is there, but for multiple reasons, we're not getting care, appropriate levels of care for these individuals. And we even have seen studies looking at the cost of substance use, and we've looked at studies specific in our workplaces. So what is the cost to the employer, the employee, the health insurance? And we can see that it's quite costly for so many different reasons. But if we were just to look at alcohol and how alcohol impacts our systems, our organs, you can see every organ is impacted by alcohol. So think about your heart, getting cardiac arrhythmias, cardiomyopathy, ischemic heart disease, hypertension. It impacts our oral health, our teeth, our lungs, most certainly our brain, pancreas, bones, GI tract. And this is just alcohol when we're looking at organ damage. We also think about the mental health impact, the impact in the community, the impact we see in the workplace in absenteeism or presenteeism or not being able to complete one's tasks. So it makes sense that we're seeing such a large cost in terms of substance use, both mentally, physically, and financially. And I think it's really helpful to understand the neurobiology of addiction so that we can have an understanding of, okay, what is going on? If somebody has never personally experienced this, it's kind of hard to understand, when this is such a destructive disease, why would one continue to participate in that? And again, like most things that are multifactorial, but if we just look at this cycle. So this is somewhat of a simplified infographic, but I think it's really helpful if you think of it in stages. So this first stage, you get a lot of a positive association. Think about the initial high or kind of that relaxed feeling that somebody may have with the first use of a substance or that early use of a substance. And to go through that, you to get the negative impacts of it. And you can have withdrawal, especially if you've been using a substance more and more frequently, you can have withdrawal symptoms, both physically and mentally. So then you, after you've gone through that withdrawal, you get this preoccupation with having that intoxication, that stage 1 again. And this is where we get a lot of cravings. This is where we can engage in behavior that is unsafe, or we start socially isolating, pulling away from our friends, because either we're in the use part of that or we're trying to obtain a substance. So this turns into this cycle that can be very, very hard to get out of. And if we look at what happens in terms of our dopamine and our reward circuits, especially with prolonged use, and this is really interesting because this doesn't just happen with substance, with other process addictions. So you can see this in people that have gambling addictions, shopping addictions. We see this in a lesser extent to those that may have addictions to food. But when we think about the dopamine and reward circuits over here on the left, you can see what this would look like in terms of a normal conversation between neurons. So we all release dopamine, and then we have dopamine receptors that take that and move it down the chain. But what happens with prolonged use, or what happens when we use substances that have these very high releases of dopamine, is that you down-regulate the amount of receptors you have. So you actually don't have as many receptors. And so with this prolonged use, you're getting less of that initial high or that initial feeling that was maybe very relaxing, and you're needing to use more and more substances. And you can see this at the bottom right, where you get this, you see this initial really high, and then not as high the next time and not as high the next time. And it's because we don't, our dopamine receptors have down-regulated, and so we don't have as much of that reward that we're getting. And then what eventually happens is you have this, again, this high, then a little bit less of a high, but see down here, you end up becoming even lower than your baseline, and then even more low. And this is where you'll hear people talking about, I needed a substance just to feel normal, because you end up hanging out down here below your baseline and become quite dysphoric. And so this ends up being this chronic stress, chronic anticipation, chronic obsession or need with a substance just to get to a baseline, and then having this withdrawal symptoms. So what happens when you downregulate your reward circuits, all the things that normally would make you happy, like playing with your kids or your dog or eating ice cream or a beautiful sunrise, those pleasures, because the level of dopamine that they really release is so much smaller than these other behaviors that released an incredibly high amount, and you've downregulated your receptors, everything becomes less rewarding. And this is where that increasing anxiousness and stress and dysphoria comes in. So you can see how somebody becomes can become very physically ill and very mentally ill after prolonged use. So what would this look like in terms of warning signs? Well, if we're looking at it in the workplace, thinking about leave and attendance, what we'll see is high absenteeism, frequent unexplained absence from work. There's also an interesting pattern that can happen. If you have a traditional workday like Monday through Friday, there could be high absences on Monday because maybe that person engaged more over the weekend in a substance, and so then Mondays can be a very difficult day to show up for work. Also, the day after a payday, you can see a lot of absences, excess use of sick time, frequent sick calls, tardiness, and then performance. Again, now that you understand this cycle of addiction, what's happening in the brain, this would make sense where it is hard to focus, concentrate, stay on task. And so you see things like missed deadlines, incomplete tasks, maybe a lower quality of work. If you have a production type job, that falling below expected outcomes. And then mood. Again, the reason why I like to talk about the neurobiology is because this all makes sense. When you think about, you can have erratic mood, mood swings, you could have euphoria to irritability. And then again, social isolation and withdrawal is a sign or a symptom of a substance use disorder. Panic attacks, being forgetful, and maybe even becoming suspicious or paranoid of other people. And then we can see physical appearance like bloodshot or dilated. We can see changes in weight. Typically, we'll see some weight loss. Also, just your physical, personal appearance can appear unkept or poorly dressed. And some of these things too, we see if somebody has a mental health condition that is untreated, we can see a change in their weight, a change in their weight. We can see a change in their appearance, socially isolating. And what is can be common is somebody that has major depressive disorder or anxiety disorder. About 33% of those people with a mental health condition have a co-occurring substance use disorder. And this is because some people are self-medicating with substances because they're not feeling well. So there's some crossover here too. Okay, so we're talking about this in the workspace and having conversations, and Salt Lake County has been so great to have these trainings and destigmatizing mental health in the workplace. So what are some things that if this were to come up in your workplace or when you guys are having internal conversations, these are some great things to think about, talk about them with leadership and HR, and any follow-up initiatives that you guys decide to do as an organization. So if you're an employee and you are faced with a colleague that you feel like may need some support, having a conversation with HR, understanding your company policy and what that looks like before making any decisions there. Or if you're in a leadership position, having internal conversations about what does our company policy look like and how can we support people to get recovery, feel safe to come ask for help in terms of recovery, and that we have good policies for that. And we'll talk some more about what that looks like. If you're in a leadership position, documenting what you see. And then if it is safe to have a conversation with an employee, like we talked before when we were discussing addressing somebody you are worried about that may have a generalized anxiety disorder or seem more depressed. Having a private conversation with somebody in an appropriate way. So, trying to turn off your cell phone or at least flip it over so it's not lighting up if you're having this very personal conversation, closing your computer, making that person feel like, okay, you are my focus right now. I'm not worried about anything else is going on. This is a private place. Let's have a conversation about that. And then what resources do you have to offer? So an EAP program, tapping into insurance care, and then follow up with that person. So there are several, we're gonna go back one before we start this video. There are several organizations that have wonderful policies and procedures for somebody in that organization. So the aviation is one of them. This is one of the videos that we're going to follow. The medical profession is another. Lawyers also have their own resource to help employees if they are challenged with a substance use disorder. And what we see across the board is that when a company is supportive, that employees, one, will ask for help, get help, return to work. It ends up, of course, being better for the employee and for the employer for so many different reasons. And there's just a short video I was just going to show you, and this is, which is for the aviation field. Okay, so we tested the video. Let's just make sure it's still working.
Love of flying, you know, being something that I've wanted to do since I was 4 years old. You know, my entire childhood, I built models of airplanes. I had posters on the wall. Man, that's who I wanted to be.
One of the last things we give up, we'll sacrifice our family, our friends, all that, but we won't sacrifice our job and our career. We hold flying very dearly.
In reality, there are far more people who are affected by all this than the drinker.
The thought of having to identify myself as an addict, what would my family think of me? I wanted to be the good girl.
If the person could stop using, they would. All people with substance use disorder want to stop. But this inability to stop, despite a desire to, despite consequences, is the hallmark. That is the internal conflict of the person with a substance use disorder.
If you don't even believe that it's a disease, which all of us involved firmly do, if you just look at the numbers and the return on investment, in the initial stages of this about 40 years ago, United was showing a 9-to-1 return on investment. More recent studies with the larger carriers are showing anywhere from a 25-to-1 to about a 38-to-1 return on investment.
So I like this video because you hear professionals speaking about, this isn't what I wanted. Aviation was my life. It was the only thing I ever wanted to do. But I was challenged very much by this disease that got in the way. However, there was this supportive program, and you hear at the very end, leadership talking about how beneficial that is. And so when we're thinking about things that we can do within our workplace, I think of it in 3 pillars. So prevention and reduction, training and education, like we're doing right now, and providing treatment and recovery. And that's why I shared Amy's story at the beginning. I mean, she was on the cover of the Salt Lake Tribune. She had lost her children and had lost her home, and was a completely different person than she had been before that happened. But with treatment and in recovery, the amazing work she's not only done for herself, but what she is doing for the community. And we know people get better. It's just like any other disease of any other organ in our body. So our heart, our lungs, as long as we have the opportunity to get treatment, we will get better. So by being here today and hearing and receiving this training, whether it's a loved one, a coworker, yourself, knowing that there is help out there, I mean, this is the first step. So like I was talking before, internally as an organization, making sure that you understand your policies around this. Is there anything we can be doing to improve our policies? And then thinking about your safety at work. So what we want to do is prevent any type of injury that could then set us up to either needing a surgery or receiving prescription medications, Prevention is always key. So in your space, thinking about ergonomics is wonderful. So, I mean, sure, we think about safety for crane operators or people driving heavy machinery, but also thinking about your own personal workspace, your computer, how it's set up, your chair, how that's set up, because repetitive motions, we can get some chronic pain from that. So having a conversation if you need to make some changes there or addressing that. And then also, what are your own alcohol policies within your work? So we think more of this is like if there are social gatherings, what that looks like, and if there's alcohol use there, and making sure there's always non-alcoholic beverages available as well. And then medical leave. So if somebody has to go on medical leave, you're wanting to make sure that people have enough time to heal before they come back, because if they come back too soon, they may rely on medications, and then that could be problematic down the road. So, and then also thinking about unpredictable hours. Is there anything like that that could potentially be a risk factor for substance use? And today is a great example of training and education, but also like internally, is there an internal place where people can go to get mental health resources, substance use resources? And if not, how could we put this together? Also, would anybody internally put together like a peer resource team? So we're seeing this become more and more popular in the workplace, where there are mental health peer teams. They have a Slack channel or a Teams channel, maybe once or twice a year, do some sort of event or like a little party or something like that, to have awareness about who's there. These are safe people to talk to, that they've gone through some training, and that they have resources that are appropriate to give depending on this situation. That would be a wonderful thing to do. And then being well versed in the EAP insurance coverage, knowing the disability and medical leave policies, and making sure that those are friendly in terms of recovery. So if somebody comes forward and they say that they would like to get some help, they need to get some help, maybe they need to get into an intensive outpatient program, making sure that their schedule can be accommodating to that. And there may need to be some changes or adjustments there. And this is an example of that. So flexible leave for residential or intensive outpatient. We're also going to talk about some apps that you can go to a meeting on your phone or on your computer. So maybe that means you just go into a private space and you don't actually have to leave work to be able to attend a meeting, and being given permission from your leadership to be able to do that. And then some people may need to return to a different job when they come back into the workplace. So some job modification or reassignment may be needed temporarily. So again, this opportunity. So I want to talk about solutions, so that if you or a loved one are looking for some support, that there are so many different options. So we have therapy, we have medication assisted treatment. There are a lot of medications that can help with cravings, help people prevent relapses, help with withdrawal if somebody needs to go into a medical detox program. And then, of course, residential treatment, intensive outpatient, and support groups. Community is a really is a key cornerstone in the recovery community, and we'll talk about that. So the national program is SAMHSA, so Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And this is a great resource for individuals and employers and employees. And I just pulled up the employer resource since we're talking about this in a workplace. But also, if you were to go to their website, there's findtreatment.gov as well. And here you could search for intensive outpatient, residential in your area, and be able to get connected with treatment facilities that take your insurance. You can also call a phone number on the website to talk to somebody if you need some help. It's confidential, it's anonymous, and a great national resource because this can be very overwhelming. And then I think it's really, really important. And again, like so many other of our chronic diseases, so I think of people that are caregivers for somebody who may have Alzheimer's, or somebody that may have a loved one with cancer. And those people most certainly are having their challenges, but caregivers or loved ones are also impacted. And Al-Anon is specific to those that have a loved one that's impacted by alcohol use disorder. And I cannot stress this enough, that it is so important to take care of yourself. Al-Anon is a group like AA, but just for family or loved ones. And you can go to meetings and get support, not feel alone. Also, sadly, when we may have a loved one that's impacted by a substance use disorder, we may have to set very specific boundaries with that person, and it can be very difficult and painful to do that. So to be able to have support with other people who understand and have been through a world of difference. So this is a fantastic resource to provide to somebody who may be experiencing this. And then, I mean, there's an app for everything now. And again, there's several apps out there. We see, like we have EAPs. We actually have specific solutions on, well, not me, I don't, in the marketplace. There are specific solutions to help support in the workplace for substance use disorder. And one of them is Pelago. So just something to be aware of. And then individually, what we have, when I was talking about if there was somebody that needed to go to a meeting but couldn't leave work, or think about maybe a parent who has children at home and they're trying to navigate recovery, return to their job, have responsibilities and can't get to a meeting. Well, there are two good resources here in the rooms and faces and voices of recovery. So these are groups that are going on all day. You can, pick one of them in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, and be able to attend them without having to leave either maybe your job or again, you're maybe at home with your kids. So just so great because again, it is having access. People do well when they have access to adequate treatment. And then here in Utah, we have USARA. I really, really love this organization. I've worked with this organization. So it stands for Utah Support Advocates for Recovery Awareness. They have peer recovery coaching, family support services, addiction recovery coaching. And then what I really do is they have these community events. So like recovery, they have sober softball. So people are getting together, moving their bodies in community with other people that have been through similar challenges. A very, very supportive community and helpful for mental health and physical health when you think about all of those things that work together. And then again, these are just some more resources that we have out there like RIA Health or We Connect. So RIA Health is evidence-based alcohol treatment online. So you can go online and schedule a consultation for free there. Then there's another place called Fit to Recover. So Fit to Recover is in Salt Lake and in Utah County. And the story of Recover is very cool. So there's a gentleman named Ian Acker, and he had been in and out of recovery and just hadn't been very successful. And so what he ended up doing is going to Sugar House Park with a boom box. And for him, movement of his body was medicine. And so he started just exercising in the park. And first, one of his buddies came with him. And then a few other people heard about it, and a couple more people came. Soon it turned out to be there was a whole group of people in recovery meeting at the park to exercise together. This became so successful, and he saw that there was such a big community need that he got this warehouse on the west side of Salt Lake and turned it into a gym. He since has moved to a bigger space and has expanded to not only fitness studio, so you can go in there and record music or a podcast. They do nutrition classes together. They do meal prepping for the week. They do service together, but all in the recovery space. They have local intensive outpatient programs, residential treatment centers that come to work out. And then of course, people come from the community. So again, just this, if one thing doesn't fit for somebody, okay, what else is out there? What is another resource? And we have so many. And as a lover of fitness myself, this platform, it warms my heart there. Okay, so I just want to show one last video here at the end.
The running club started a year and 2 or 3 months ago. My involvement gives me the ability to impact lives in a way that I can't.
The total state prison commitment for Mr. Williams is 71 years, 4 months to life. Thank you.
David was one of the first members of the running club.
I slept up under here for maybe 2 years.
I'm down on Skid Row. I'm better than this. No, I'm not. I'm not better than that at all. I got no hope. That's where I wound up, Skid Row, and I lost everything when I went down there.
I said, what gang are you guys from? I started shooting at them, and I seen them both fall right there in the driveway.
One horrendous act does not define a person in his or her entirety.
I came in the mission at 300 pounds. Judge Mitchell came in, I'm starting a running club. I couldn't waddle down the street. I waddled down the street and just, oh God, I'm dying.
You do not wake up one morning and say you're going to run a marathon. You have to be focused, and you really have to be committed to the proposition.
I just kind of thought, as a drug addict, this is my lot in life. But what running did is it gave me my fight back. It gives us our fight back. No matter where we come from, we can do anything and attain the impossible.
He doesn't spend money on anything, nothing, except running shoes, plane trips.
35 years of drugs and addiction, 10 years sleeping on the streets of Skid Row, and here we are in Africa. Wow.
Modi is not running with us this morning. Okay, major relapse.
I'm an elite super athlete.
Oh God.
You're not?
Your legs are like falling off at the end of every run.
People question, why are you spending this kind of money to take people halfway around the world?
It's such a big deal being here. It's not just about homeless people running.
The city is incredibly empowering. It gives them dignity, and that's what this is about.
So for any of you that may be interested in that, the story is about Judge Mitchell, and he is a judge in LA. and he started running, as you could see, with individuals who were unsheltered on Skid Row, had been into drug court. And like I was talking about Ian Acker's story of going to Sugar House Park to start lifting weights, this changed people's lives. And he helps them go all over the world to run marathons. So you saw they ran a marathon in Africa. They ran and the power, you're not only getting the recovery community together, you have community and movement of your body and purpose, and people there that are cheering for you and have your back. And again, being able to provide that space, we can provide that space in the workplace, we can provide that in our family systems, we can provide that in our communities. And having this approach of how can we prevent, how do we train and educate people, and then how do we get people access to care? And knowing that the recovery is not always a linear line. Unfortunately, we can have some ups and we have some downs like anything in life. But again, that there's always hope that there are people there to help support, whether that's USARA, Fit to Recover, or an intensive outpatient program, talking about it, and again, letting anyone know that you're here to help provide resources where you can, and stand in their corner. So I really appreciate everyone being here today. I'm happy to answer any questions. If you'd like to reach out to me privately, that is fine. And again, thank you for being that difference in this world to help destigmatize mental health.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Absolutely love the stories that you told, and that it really just destigmatizes addiction. Listening to you be so empathetic, right? And listening to these stories of people and how they've overcome and how they wanted to give back, it obviously shows that, it is a problem that people want solved and maybe feel trapped or stuck. And so anything we can do in the workplace to help employees or their families get resources in these situations, let's do what we can. Thank you so much for sharing all those resources. Are there any questions that you have? And you can put them in the chat box, but also feel free to unmute if you would like. While we're waiting for those, I guess my first question is, out of all the things you mentioned today, what do you think is the number one thing we can take back to our workplaces to help destigmatize addiction?
Yeah, I think, well, a couple of things, depending on your role. So if you are in any type of leadership role, even if it's just you manage one person, be an example of, and this isn't just for the recovery community, we're just thinking about mental health in general. What we see in terms of research of people coming forward and getting help is that they feel like their leadership is a safe place to talk to. And so how can you lead by example? And there are many ways that we can do that, right? By having something on our desk that says, I'm a mental health advocate, or internally having a conversation about, like we were talking about, these peer support groups, that you guys have a conversation. I've seen workplaces make t-shirts, and every Friday they wear these t-shirts to work. So one, this just being a safe space. The other thing that I've seen people do is at the beginning of meetings, having a little something to say. Everybody gets to say how their week's going, how they're doing. Is there anything they need? I have a Slack channel for that. So again, an open, safe space. And then the same thing for employees. When I was talking about, if you internally decide to do like a peer support group, or there's a symbol that you put on a desk to say I'm a safe sponsor. You have resources if you would like to talk to me about that. And then just talking about it. It's okay to talk about how we feel. That doesn't mean we have to self-disclose all this personal information, but it's okay to say, hey, I'm having a kind of a rough day and I'm going to do a meditation. Does anyone want to join me? Or I'm going to go for a 10-minute walk for my mental health. The more we talk about it, the more normalized it is.
Those are great examples. Thank you. 'Cause those are things that we can definitely do, and each person has the power to do it at their workplace, no matter what your position or status is. So thank you. All right. Well, if there aren't any questions, please remember to go to your WellSteps account and mark your attendance for today. And thank you again, Catherine. We will have you back in June on the 25th at Whitmore Library, and we will be advertising heavily. So our participants, look out for that, and please join us.
Thank you so much.
You have a fabulous day.
You too. Bye, everyone.
See you all.